Now let's turn to Ghana, which is selling the longest-dated Eurobond ever issued by a sub-Saharan African government.
Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta is challenging global investors to put their money behind Ghana's growing economy.
Ghana has added 10.7 billion Ghana cedis to its public debt stock in just 4 months.
If you go to the market today, you will not get anybody to lend to you below 9.5%.
You can't be in the capital markets if you don't have a mechanism for repayment.
One basic understanding of the market is that when you come onto the market unattractive, you'll be punished.
There will be no haircuts.
There will be no haircuts.
Instantly, the market knew the president wasn't speaking the truth.
Ghana has been in the spotlight after announcing it will default on most of its external debt.
Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta indicates that Eurobond holders may face a nominal haircut of between 30 and 40% as part of the restructuring of external debt.
Discussions with Eurobond investors are continuing. We have given a broad outline of 20 to 40% haircut under 20 years and interest rates of less than 5%.
It's more of discipline. It's more fiscal discipline. And then also we fell into the habit, if you ask, of borrowing first domestic treasury bills. Treasury bill is for liquidity. That's why it's only 90 days, 91 days. And usually at the beginning of the year, you cannot reduce certain expenditures, wages and the rest. So you borrow short term. You say 90 days, 3 months, and then for exigencies. Then when the revenue starts coming, you pay off because for only 90 days. Yeah. But we started rolling over. The non-payment resulted in more borrowing and more borrowing. But we began to carry that fiscal indiscipline to the sovereign bond market. So we were issuing only interest-only loans and the rest. And then the 10 years caught up with us, which was what we realized in 2014, that we're just paying only interest. And you can't be in the capital markets if you don't have a mechanism for repayment.
Following its exit from the heavily indebted poor countries initiative some 2 decades ago, Ghana has consistently developed a strong taste for commercial loans from the international capital market, Eurobonds, typically securing loans at interest rates ranging from 6% to 11%.
Before, we used to have money from IMF, but Germany, Danida, JICA. And then as we said we're growing rich, we depended more on international capital markets, got a lot of money from international capital markets, and how we invested is another problem.
Each fiscal year, Ghana requires between $1 billion and $3 billion worth of foreign loans to support its budget and address balance of payment challenges. Before the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Ghana government had borrowed $5 billion from the Eurobond market between 2017 and 2019. Repayment was heavily reliant on revenue mobilization, a strategy that did not materialize as expected. Consequently, by the end of 2022, Ghana's total loans from Eurobonds had reached $14 billion, with outstanding debt exceeding $13 billion.
Even though Ghana was not the first country to get the necessary international ratings, credit ratings, in order to be able to borrow from the international capital markets, we were the first to issue in 2007. And since then, we've become one of the largest issuers on the continent. The challenge that arose was that we started to borrow too much. Initially, it appeared as if confidence in the economy was sufficient to continue the cycle.
In 2007, Ghana stepped into the international capital market for the first time, with the first issuance of $750 million. The then Finance Minister, Akufo-Addo, returned from London with $750 million and several firsts. In fact, Ghana was the first sub-Saharan sovereign state to enter the international bond market and the first post-HIPC country to tap international capital.
We spent 336 million of our own oil revenue to start paying off the first sovereign bond issued under President Akufo, moving away from interest only. Out of the 750, we left enough in the sinking fund, about 250 plus, for the current government to use 200 million to pay off the final installment on that, October 4th, the anniversary 2017. You know, it was a 2-year bond.
After going fallow for more than 5 years, Ghana was back to the Eurobond market for more loans.
The Mills era, we didn't borrow a lot. We had borrowed significantly under the Mahama era. And the reason that happened was that the Mahama era was trying to create a new strategy where they can combine IMF programs with international borrowing, which is what Kenya is doing right now. So Kenya gets money from the IMF, but it also borrows from the international market. And it blends both. It uses one to strengthen its hand in the other. So the Mahama government took that. But you can see evidence that initially, this was the borrowing costs that we're faced with. We hit as much as 10.75% for a very sudden thing before they went back to the IMF in 2015. So by the time they went back to the IMF in 2015, they were been able to bring down the cost of borrowing from 10.75% to 9% and a little above that. So one of the things that is evident is also that international markets tend to look at the IMF programs as evidence of, or rather a source of unbiased analysis.
Seth Tekpe was finance minister, and he led Ghana to its second trip to the Eurobond market to borrow $1 billion in 2013. He returned to the market for more loans in 2014 and 2015, and by the end of the Mahama administration in 2016, Ghana had taken Eurobond loans of up to $3 billion in 3 years.
Actually, I was the minister who, would I say, honored or what, to receive the letter from the World Bank and the African Development Bank telling us that we had become a middle-income country. We couldn't borrow and repay over 40 years. We could only borrow and repay over 25 years when we became middle-income country.
So that was a cap that was placed on our borrowing.
It means that they call it moving to harder terms.
In 2017, Ghana saw a change in leadership as President Akufo-Addo assumed office. Ken Ofori-Atta was appointed finance minister. During this period, Ghana was halfway through a $918 million International Monetary Fund program initiated in 2015 under the previous administration led by John Dramani Mahama.
Now, when the baton was handed to President Akufo-Addo in 2017, they came to meet an existing IMF program, remember, from 2015. And that program, they had challenges, as I mentioned, managing that program because they were still balancing it with international borrowing at a significant level. So we had what often you call slippages, right? Now the government had to would double up and try and comply with the terms that the government had agreed. So 2017 was a fairly tough year for the government, right? Because you come and inherit a program, there are already some slippages, the IMF is not that happy. You need to double up and make sure that the program is running properly, given that you intend to do even more on international capital markets. So you need the IMF data, the IMF analysis, the IMF verdict to be even more favorable.
The IMF board sits for hopefully the successful conclusion of Ghana's program and therefore an exit. And therefore the market in our mind has overwhelmingly endorsed the policies we've gone through the past 2 years and their comfort that going forward the country is in a good position to do well.
By 2018, Ghana's economic indicators had blossomed, fueled by positive economic forecasts and boosted credit ratings resulting from investor confidence following the successful implementation of the IMF program. The Akufo-Addo administration made its inaugural entry into the international capital market. By the close of 2018, the government had borrowed $2 billion through Eurobonds.
The problem was that we started to rack up the debt very quickly. Ghana is the biggest Eurobond borrower if you use its economy as a yardstick. Yeah. When you look at the carrying capacity of its economy. How? Because we moved from $4.5 billion in 2018 to $13.2 billion in a relatively short period of time.
In 2019, Ghana made its 7th appearance in the capital market, marking a significant milestone by successfully issuing its first triple tranche Eurobond offering on the international capital market.
So let me first talk about the bond sale yesterday, the 3 billion Eurobond sale. We were hearing it was oversubscribed by more than 6 times. Can you give us an update on how oversubscribed it was and how that sale went?
So essentially, we came out for $3 billion and amazingly in 3 tranches of 7-year, 12-year and 31-year, and all of those were overwhelmingly oversubscribed, as you mentioned. At some point, $22 billion ended up at 19.9, in which we closed with $3 billion.
The decision to launch this triple tranche transaction was influenced by the positive sentiment expressed by the international investor community. During 2019, emerging market EM yields were more attractive compared to those in developed markets, providing emerging economies like Ghana with a favorable opportunity to secure more loans.
With that kind of good appetite, I'm bound to ask you, will you come back to the market in 2019? And maybe even more so, would you even consider or deny that you will go for 100-year bond?
Well, I mean, it certainly gives one reason to pause. You know, there's usually speculation that election years are years in which countries sort of bust their budgets. Right now, I think we are comfortable with what we have done. We understand the market sentiment. We usually have a mid-year review to see how we are doing with the budget, and those are when, you know, we make decisions.
Just before the onset of the COVID-19 lockdown, Ghana received strong backing from the capital market, a sentiment reinforced by Moody's, the international ratings agency, which expressed confidence in the country's economy and provided a positive outlook. In February 2020, Ghana achieved a significant milestone by becoming the first African nation to issue a 41-year bond, a second tri-tranche on the international capital market.
Let's turn to Ghana, which is selling the longest dated Eurobond ever issued by a sub-Saharan African government. It has a 40-year maturity and is part of a wider sale, including notes maturing in 2035 and 2027, in order to raise $3 billion. To talk more about this, we're joined by Ken Ofori-Atta, the Finance Minister of Ghana. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Nara. It's good to be here again.
Yeah, great to have you here. Now, this offer, the Eurobond offer, was 5 times oversubscribed. Does this mean that you're going to continue to test demand and issue even more longer-term securities? The last time you were here, we talked about a century bond.
We did talk about a century bond, and last year we tried a 31, which was very successful. We've moved 10 years more to 41, so we are nearing it. I think yesterday it was very successful. $3 billion in 3 tranches, 7, 14, and 41. And we had a 15 billion book to work with. So clearly the markets have rallied in support of Ghana post-IMF, and that's good indications for the future for us.
Ghana accumulated loans totaling $8 billion from Eurobonds.
It changed the composition of our debt. It changed our debt from one where the majority of the money comes from multilateral and bilateral sources to one where the commercial sources were the most predominant.
In the fiscal year of 2020, the $3 billion proceeds were utilized for liability management operations, refinancing energy sector debt, and meeting budgetary requirements.
These are the tabulated costs of what it takes to get money from the capital markets, right?
Significant component.
Yes, because you'll be paying money to lead arrangers, paying money to legal firms, paying money to marketing and PR firms. You pay a whole bunch of money. So the money that you get, in the end, you may be paying as much as 7% or more in the market to your advisors. Now, if there are people in the government who have good friends in the capital markets, you know, they are friends in JP Morgan, they are friends in Morgan Stanley, they are friends in Goldman Sachs, whatever, of course, they're going to be happy to pay those fees to their friends. But is that in national interest?
In 2021, following the conclusion of the COVID-19 lockdown, Ghana reopened for international trade, yet faced the challenge of a substantial budget deficit. The country's financial stability relied heavily on support from the international capital market. In a groundbreaking move, Ghana became the first African nation to issue a zero-coupon tranche Eurobond. By the close of 2021, Ghana had accumulated Eurobond loans of up to $11 billion over 4 years. $2 billion in 2018, $3 billion in 2019, $3 billion in 2020 during the pandemic, and a final $3 billion in 2021.
This comes at a time as well when the premium investors have asked to hold riskier assets is rising, in part because of the fallout from the coronavirus. Do you foresee, if we get any more of concerns around the coronavirus outbreak, that this could impact you issuing more bonds, or how you think about that?
Well, we're not going to come back until next year.
Something happened in 2021 when we decided to go to the market twice instead of the usual cycle of going once, normally for a $3 billion bond. And when we went the second time, that set off alarm bells because people started to look more closely because it was out of pattern. And then they realized that Ghana was far, far above its borrowing capacity. And therefore, this was rather reckless.
In 2022, Ghana faced economic challenges as emerging markets experienced soaring coupon rates for bonds, rendering them exorbitant. The escalation of sovereign bond interest rates was exacerbated by tensions between Russia and Ukraine. Consequently, only 3 countries, Nigeria, South Africa, and Angola, managed to issue Eurobonds in the first half of the year. Other nations, including Kenya and Ghana, were priced out of the international capital markets due to unsustainable interest rates.
When we started getting the downgrades and others, that we better fix it because the domestic market was just too shallow.
It was quite clear that we're in too deep and we're in above our heads. And so once the rating downgrade came, that sealed our fate. We could no longer go back to the international capital markets to borrow, at least not on the Eurobond market, until we address issues of debt sustainability.
You are mindful about the cost of accessing capital from the markets, okay, and especially when your rating has gone down the way it is, we are almost in a junk territory, right? So one basic understanding of the market is that when you come onto the market unattractive, you'll be punished.
For Ghana, the burden of debt servicing obligations, limited to interest payments only, was projected to reach approximately $5 billion at both domestic and external levels in 2023. Unlike its 16th enrollment in 2015, Ghana's unsustainable debt position was certainly a huge obstacle in obtaining an IMF deal. This meant a lot of conditions had to be met. The IMF's message to Ghana was very simple: restructure your debt or no bailout package.
I also want to assure all Ghanaians that no individual or institutional investor, including pension funds, in government treasury bills or instruments, will lose their money as a result of our ongoing IMF negotiations. There will be no haircuts. So I urge all of you to ignore the false rumors.
Instantly, the market knew the president wasn't speaking the truth. You see that right after the president made a statement, the reactions were more or less to reject the statement. And therefore, my expectation is that any investor who probably took a decision on the back of that wasn't an investor, was probably a lotto doctor.
At the external level, Ghana is grappling with severe economic challenges, primarily centered on its balance of payments issues. These problems have led to a depletion of the country's international reserves and resulted in crises such as exchange rate fluctuations.
You can't be in the capital markets if you don't have a mechanism for repayment, which is a simple explanation for the sinking fund, which coincidentally is in the Constitution, but it's optional, which means that the framers of the Constitution, including finance ministers and others, may have known that there was that weakness and we needed to set it up. contingency fund in the constitution. We never set it up. So with the advent of oil, the question you asked, we decided let us begin to channel part of the oil revenue, which is new, to resolve, some of these things, if you like, bad practices.
The IMF has pledged $3 billion. The World Bank, $1.5 billion, with the remaining $10.5 billion expected to come from external restructuring. Securing the $10.5 billion debt relief from external creditors poses a significant challenge for Ghana.
Discussions with the Eurobond investors are continuing. We have given a broad outline of 20 to 40% haircut under 20 years and interest rates of less than 5%.
You look at similar restructurings that have been done not too long ago, like the one that was done by Zambia, which was a very shallow treatment, to be honest with you. In fact, it also included early amortization, which meant that the bondholders could get paid earlier than anticipated for some of the amount. On top of that, there was some deferment, but there wasn't the massive NPV cuts that were expected. And now that the bilaterals are saying that was too cozy. And they are not willing to accept it on the basis of what they call comparability of treatment, which is simply a way of saying that different creditors like to see the burden shared fairly. So in the case of Ghana, we're trying to go the other extreme. We are trying to put all the pain on the private sector. I don't know the extent to which the government feels that kind of hardcore negotiation tactic will serve it.
The country received the first tranche of $600 million after an assurance from external creditors. However, access to the subsequent tranches depends on passing the reviews, contingent on concluding financing assurances with foreign creditors.
I don't think the government is that keen on restructuring. Why? It's very simple. Restructuring itself doesn't help the government. You know why? Because then you have to start paying. Now it's simply not paying. It's paying nothing. Restructuring means you have to start paying something. Unless it can get long deferments, so it doesn't pay anything at all. That is not guaranteed. However, assurances help the government a lot. If they get assurances, a letter from the creditor committees they are working with on the bilateral side, so the Paris Club plus the non-Paris Club members, they get that letter, they get another tranche released. Next year, they get some assurances from some creditors that progress has been made. They get another tranche released. So they don't necessarily have to make full progress.
Certainly, the situation where China holds all of Ghana's collateralized loans positions it as a pivotal player at the negotiation table for debt treatment. This factor is crucial in determining the financing assurances Ghana needs to secure subsequent tranches under the fund program.
The truth of the matter is that it's never too clear, because as the bond delves deeper and deeper into junk territory, as it becomes less and less attractive, people that buy tend to be high-risk players. And high-risk players want high reward. You get the point? So their appetite is actually higher than the original blue-chip investors that we had. So these are people that bought knowing they could lose a lot of money. So at this point, there's no reason for them to accept a deep haircut. I mean, because they are willing to take the risk of a default. People that are willing to take a risk of a default or continuing default, because we are already in default. And their mindset is different. They are willing to maintain the state of default until they can get as much money as they can. I think, therefore, that we are underestimating the resolve of the international bondholders to get as much money as they can out of us.
Ghana would have access to $600 million in financing. To ensure timely completion of the review, official creditors and the Ghanaian authorities will need to reach agreement on a debt treatment consistent with the objectives of the program and in line with the financing assurances that creditors provided in May of 2023.
Ghana stands at a critical economic juncture where the success of its 17th IMF program hinges on substantial debt relief, expenditure cuts, and significant revenue mobilization.